Some schools are struggling to implement research-based teaching, but they want to. People sometimes wave my book at me and go, "Oh, I've got your book." And you go, "Oh, well, yeah, maybe you kind of want to open it now and see what it says." Most of the teachers won't have had time to do any actual reading of actual original research. You kind of got to look for things which have stood the test of time. And then this is the important bit. And I think this is really important. And it's often the reason why some teachers are not as good as they like to think they are.
Tom Sherrington has led schools, consulted globally, and co-authored the Teaching Walkthrough series, one of the most impactful professional learning resources for teachers. Tom, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast. Whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
Well, thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm in London, North London.
Obviously, with so many teachers and leaders buying into a lot of, let's say, evidence-informed and research-informed practices, let's give it a real sort of devil's advocate question. Does it risk making lessons boring? So is there a danger then that research-led teaching can kill creativity?
No, I just don't recognize that at all. I think that's really weird. In fact, I would say that's a defense of someone who probably needs to have a word with himself. Why would you say that? I mean, kids knowing stuff and being successful and understanding the topics that you're teaching is the joy. I mean, if you don't believe in your own subject, to think, and then this is the important bit, and I think this is really important, and it's often the reason why some teachers are not as good as they like to think they are, is because their methods succeed with a small minority in the class, and it gives them the illusion of like a buzz, a vibe, great discourse, great pair work, great kind of interactions with certain children. But when you look at those lessons, what about that child over there? What about those students there? What about those boys there? What about those girls there? They're not in it. They're not participating. They're not producing those responses. It's just some of the students are. And the teacher is getting carried away with this sort of way of teaching, which for them feels lovely and organic and spontaneous and all this. But they're not systematically ensuring that all the learners are learning. So it's not good teaching. You can't get away with that. It's not okay. You can get away with it if you don't care, or if the children go and learn with a tutor at home, or all other things. But if it's as a product for your teaching, you can't just say it's killing my creativity. You'd have to demonstrate that all the children were learning as well as using, obvious things like questioning techniques, retrieval practice, modeling, scaffolding, all these ideas. The other thing I'd say to that is, sometimes the challenge is much more simple. It's just saying we're just not calling it the same thing. So let me look at you teach. You think you're creative and maverick and not using those techniques. I'm going to say to you, you are. Your self-image is of someone who doesn't want to be shackled by the confines of this cognitive science. But actually, in your lessons, you are using retrieval practice. You are scaffolding. You are modeling. You're doing extensive questioning. You're engaging. You're breaking down into small steps. You're attending to working memory and so on. It's like, so you don't want to describe it through the lens of cognitive science, because it's kind of seems to be sort of anathema to you to do that. But actually, you're just calling something else because it is what it is. And so often you have to sort of evaluate exactly what's going on in a lesson. So I just think that, and in terms of creativity, I have a real issue with this whole notion that teachers are somehow having their autonomy squished by cognitive science. I think that's absolute nonsense. Because whenever you go into a lesson armed with all the tools that you learn about through exploring cognitive science, you have this toolkit of techniques and routines, but you have to then deploy them intelligently, responsively, depending on how your learners are doing. And then the thinking, they're like, okay, what do I do next? Okay, what question should I go to now? Who should I ask next? What routine should we enact next? How long does it last? Do I need to give another example? All of those things are, in the moment, very spontaneous, creative. And that's the kind of creativity you need with effective teaching, is which step to take next. And that's, the more informed you are about learning, the better choices you're going to make. So creativity that's not that, well, what is that? What does it look like to teach creatively if it's not that? I just think, well, what are you doing then? What are you doing that's creative, that isn't what I've just described? I would say, well, show me. I mean, sounds weird. How could that possibly be better than what I've just described? And it never is.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that as an answer. And when people ask me, I mean, I'm teaching now, it was 20 years, and they say, what's one of the best parts about teaching? And it's like, it's being creative, that not one lesson is ever going to be the same type of lesson. And if I think about how I taught 20 years ago to how I teach today, massively different. And I think there's so much opportunity for it. But I ask the question because, like you say, sometimes it is a veil in which teachers and leaders hide behind, for an excuse not to. So I think a wonderful answer from you from that. Thank you ever so much. And those are some of the things that we want to dive into today. And obviously a lot of the work that you do is built on evidence-informed teaching. But I'm going to probably start this off with maybe the uncomfortable truth here and maybe a bit of a challenging question. Do you think that most schools implement research properly, or do you think it's more performative?
It's interesting because I don't think I would pose those as the alternative. So I think schools, I think being performative is a sort of pejorative, isn't it? Sort of that means they're doing it sort of on the surface. And I don't think people do that on purpose. I certainly think that they would some schools are struggling to implement research-based teaching, but they want to. And I don't often come across schools where I think there's a kind of cynicism there, where they're kind of trying to pay lip service to it, but don't really believe in it. I think most people I meet in teaching are pretty sincere. But sometimes they get a bit, I would say, bogged down in wanting to have a kind of a fast track to something, to have accountability systems, to sort of push things through faster than is a kind of natural implementation sort of time frame. Whereas where you find there's a kind of real kind of deep engagement with research, it's a kind of long, deep, slow commitment over time. And it's based around a genuine engagement with the research and genuine engagement with the kind of effective ideas about professional development. And it's not quick fix or dressing things up to quickly demonstrate things. So I think that's the way I'd frame it. And some schools need help to cut through some of the kind of challenges they face with the people they have. And sometimes schools, to be quite honest, are aware that there's this sort of research engagement kind of thing happening, but they have really no into it. There's nobody in the school, or hardly anyone, who really has done the reading or knows the stuff, and they feel kind of like out of the loop, and they're trying to catch up. So there's this feeling of trying to catch up about it, which is a whole other dimension.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned those points about the long slog, as it were. Do you think the sticking power and almost the fact we've got to show resilience is almost detrimental to this? Because, again, I suppose teachers now themselves are living in an instant gratification world where, with all the things of social media and all the things we're used to with phones, we kind of want those quick fixes. How and what do you recommend in terms of how do we overcome that?
Well, I think, often when I go into schools as a consultant, or now more and more with using my Walkthroughs toolkit and sort of supporting schools to use it. What you set up is a long-term process. It's why now I'd say it's probably true to say never about this. I never do a one-off training day in a school where I go in and leave. It's always a school using the Walkthroughs so that I know there's a process that they're engaging in, and we talk about how to use the process. So I feel like what you have to do is that's what CPD should be. That's what professional development should be about. It's about a long-term thing. So you start talking about where do we start and what's our long-term. So things like setting up a professional development library of books and so on. Sometimes people celebrate that they've bought all these books and there they are on the shelf. And when you go to visit the school, you sort of look at the books and they're sort of notably People sometimes wave my book at me, go, "Oh, I've got your book." And you go, "Oh, well, yeah, maybe you kind of want to open it now and see what it says, But you have to you can be cynical about that. But basically, I just think look, you've just started. Don't be too pleased with yourself because you've got a lovely looking library of books. What's the process for engagement with that? So then we have to take the next step and say, so where's the forum for teachers to discuss what's in the books and how does that work? And then, so I feel like long-term means constant. It's not like a 2 to 5 year process. It's a constant process. So you have to set up a thing where research ideas are coming into the school. There's a forum for discussing and evaluating them. There's a process for identifying, therefore, the consequences for teaching, and that could be in a department or a year group or a whole school. And then following through and implementing and then reviewing. So you have to say, if we haven't got that in mind, that whole structure, then it's probably never going to work. Having a few teachers who, in their own terms, are kind of nerdy and geeky about research is nice, but it doesn't change the school or doesn't change outcomes for children. You have to translate that into things the teachers actually do differently in the classroom. And sometimes, and very often actually, in fact, I love these people. You meet in a school the champion, the person or the people who are the core, who are the people pushing the ideas in to the system of discourse in the school. And, they're the ones turning up to Saturday conferences or reading in their own time. And they're brilliant. When you have a school with none of those people, it's much harder because you can't make people read books. You can't make people go to Saturday conferences. And if you don't have anyone in your school switched into that discourse, where do you get your ideas from? You get it from official bodies, which like exam boards and that type of thing. And it's always far down the track, distorted into something else. And often you think, quite a lot of schools are very dependent on formal structures of communication because they're not switched into the dynamic world of online communication and conferencing, which is really where it's happening.
Yeah. You've basically described a colleague that I used to work with at my previous school who was head and shoulders the most informed, like evidence informed, and loved it with a passion, loved it. We're having all these books and having these open discussions. But unfortunately, she was just really shy. She was just lacked that confidence of sharing that information with other people. But when you went into her lessons, phenomenal. Like her lesson plan was always explaining the why she was doing something, and like this is explicit instruction for this, or this is this principle and why I'm using it. And it was almost like an art piece of artwork, I think is the best way to describe it in terms of how things flowed. But she just lacked that belief that the ideas that she had were good enough to share with the teaching community. And I kind of trying to not coerce, but really just kind of go, look, you can offer so much into that school. It's like you said, though, the forum for discussion. It's having the opportunity to do that, because sometimes those individuals can also be isolated and kind of just like, you're outstanding, you're doing amazing work, we'll leave you alone.
Yeah.
Whereas actually we want those people not to lead, but to share. I think that's the key message I get from that is to share in those discussions of good practice.
It's true, but I would say, it depends whose responsibility it is. So ultimately, it's the leader's responsibility to facilitate this. And if you're relying on people with their personalities, sometimes it's a shy person, but sometimes it's someone who just, has a big voice and wants to stand up in the staff room and say stuff, or in the team. And both those things are problematic because there's no evaluation there of priorities, the solutions that are needed, the things which are going to actually address the issues in the classroom. So what can happen sometimes is you get enthusiast person thinks that because they're interested in idea X, everyone else needs to hear about it, goes into the school and kind of says, idea X is the thing, it's everyone should do X. And people are going, look, why? Why are you making me do that? That doesn't feel like it's solving the problem I have. And you've read a book and you've been to a conference, like, great for you.
Yeah.
Don't make me now go, yeah, we're all doing this, especially if it's quite a generic or kind of abstract thing, like something like metacognition or something. There was a whole wave of that a few years ago. Like you go to schools and they'd say, or I'd be asked. I can often tell what's going on because people ask me to talk about it. Can you do a session for our staff on metacognition? I go, well, I could, but why? What's it for? What's the issue you're trying to address? And at some level, it can be just educative, like people are interested and they like to hear about it. I can say, I can buy into that and say, okay, that's cool. Let's talk about that. But the consequence, if it's going to raise standards in your school, we've got to translate that into actionable things that then change. And so we've got to focus on that and how's that going to work. So I feel like there are lots of different research engagement modes and models that schools have. And I think you have to operate on a number of fronts. So you have to have a forum for it. You have to have a system for CPD in a school which allows ideas to come in. And you have to have training around actionable consequences of the kind of theoretical concept, all that kind of stuff. And if that starts off with a CPD library and books and so on, that's brilliant. And I'm saying that's someone who writes books and edits a series of books. But it's always important to stress it's just a start. It's the book itself or the research idea. In fact, just earlier, I might say more about this. Depends on how the questions go. But I just been reading some research just like earlier today. And it's so interesting, just how research is packaged up. And the more you know about other research, the more you can interpret and evaluate the specific piece of it and then evaluate what kind of how much weight to put on it and all that kind of stuff. So it's like any kind of literacy, you have to have a kind of intelligence around evaluating research and what you think matters to your context, because it's always got a kind of values-laden aspect to it. That's what I really was struck by in the thing I've just been reading, which is when I started reading it, it sounds very assertive about things teachers should and shouldn't do. But when you get to the end, you think, it's because they've got such a strong bias in this particular direction. No wonder that's what they're saying. And it made me reread the whole thing again and go, okay, so I'm not so bothered about that now, because they're not. It's not a totally neutral piece, and it kind of hardly ever is. So, I think these things are really subtle.
I mean, what you've said there, do you think that could also be one of the reasons why so many teachers maybe are scared of getting into research because of, I'm going to use the word jargon, but the research-heavy language and the way it's presented? I remember speaking with Bradley Bush earlier last year sometime and talking about how we interpret research. And were it not for people like yourself who could do it and simplify it down into a series of books and to make it accessible for more teachers, would that be then a block to actually, I'm going to say, just normal teachers being able to get their hands on and understanding research in itself and being able to apply it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it depends on how close to the original you need. I mean, my feeling is that in most schools I go to, most of the teachers won't have had time to do any actual reading of actual original research, and they just haven't. But they're using research-informed ideas because it's been introduced through training. So, for example, if I said to you, we're doing retrieval practice activities in the school, and it's a thing we all need to be doing, and regularly doing low-stakes testing of children and making sure they've remembered what they were taught before. That you don't have to have done the research. You don't have to have read anything about retrieval practice directly to go, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to do that in my teaching. And most schools are like that. In most schools, most teachers can't go anywhere near an original research paper with, effect sizes or bar charts or even know the context of the research. They just buy into the idea that, yeah, I get it. Retrieval practice is important. How do we do it in our context? What's a good routine for that? And they'll into it. So they're using a research-informed strategy because it's kind of got a common sense element to it. It's got they recognise it as an issue that they have to address.
Yeah.
If you've got something which the teachers don't think they have to address, and someone is saying, "Here's a research thing," like there are some. Let me give another example. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm going off track here, but
love it.
So, going back a few years, there was some research around this idea of students expressing their confidence in their in their answers in maths. And so, you could do a test, and then at the end of the test, you go back through the test, and the students would rate their confidence. How confident are you that you got the answer right? And then when you give them the answers, the theory was, and the research seemed to say, that the students who had expressed their confidence first when receiving the answers learn much more about that because they're more tuned into, they're more receptive to hearing the correct answers. Now, I read a thing a couple of weeks ago which said there's a bit of cold water put on that idea, that it's maybe not that, it's not quite a strong effect, or maybe it doesn't even work that way. And so all of a sudden, you've got this thing which a few years ago, you could have listened to a podcast and some people raving about this idea and thinking, I must do this with my maths teaching. And then a few years later going, oh, well, that study over there didn't find that worked. So have I been wasting my time? And you sort of feel like it's quite a niche thing to do. It's quite a deliberate bit of maths practice, which I would say most maths teachers don't use. and that's okay, because it's just so yeah, I think when you're doing research engaged stuff in school, I feel like you kind of got to look for things which have stood the test of time, which most teachers recognize is a problem they have and are going to do quite comfortably most days and most weeks, not some sort of niche thing which sounds a bit groovy. And I'm not saying that confidence rating isn't a good idea. It's just that it's not at the status of, every teacher in maths should be doing that because it's so obvious we should all be doing that. It isn't like that. It's a kind of interesting idea. We might explore it. So you have to kind of be sensitive to the kind of realities of these things and hold back from saying we're all doing this. Yeah. Unless you're really, really sure that it's something which is going to sustain and which teachers will weave into their habits of practice kind of over years. Because otherwise you're kind of just wasting time and, you get cynicism around this stuff.
Yeah. I've got, from everything you've said there, I've got kind of two scenario questions. I'm interested in your take on this. One kind of ties into what you've just said about whether it should be whole school or who decides on what. But I want you to imagine that we've got a high-performing teacher in a school, but they refuse to engage with research-led methods. Now, they've got good results, but they don't want to change. Do you push them or do you let them be?
It depends really a lot on what you mean by good results. And if someone's getting... I used to work in a school in England, a selective school, where the students were very able and very motivated generally. They were selected from that. And you could teach in all sorts of ways there. And you go to a chemistry lesson, say, and watch a chemistry lesson by someone who's quite a traditional kind of teacher. They weren't using the techniques they were using because it was evidence informed or in their head or because it was school policy. They were doing it because they had found that worked. Probably the best chemistry lessons I've ever seen in my life and great outcomes. Now, am I going to tell that teacher to change how they teach because I've got a set of ideas? No. Why would I? So I have to evaluate the success there. The need for me to get that teacher to teach in line with some other whole school initiative is low when they're high performing. In that same school, a head of department who's a head of English, pretty maverick, would be quite happy for me to describe them publicly as maverick because they were incredibly eccentric methods and some beautiful lessons. Sometimes giving lectures to the class, sometimes getting the kids to perform poems standing up on their chairs and stuff. Brilliant, just inspiring. You would never say, teach like him, somebody else, because he was unique. He was a person. He's a personality. He was eccentric and interesting and always challenging everything. So you think, well, there has to be a home for people like that in teaching, or else we're going to lose some genius people. So I think you have to be careful. If someone is saying, I've been into a lesson where, the way that the tables were set up, half the class were facing away from the board, while the teacher was teaching, and they're in groups of 4, because the teacher was so committed to group work. I love it when the kids all collaborate. They're in groups of 4. I like them to talk. Yeah, but when you're explaining stuff and they can't see it and they're not looking at you and they're distracting each other. And I'd go into that lesson and say, you can't teach this.
Yeah.
I'd be quite assertive and say, at the simple level of engaging attention, which is an evidence-informed concept, you can't maximize thinking and attention with the children facing away from you. It's absolutely obvious. Now, obviously, that teacher didn't get good outcomes, so you could also point to them.
Yeah.
So I feel like you have to be careful. It's quite rare for teachers to be brilliant and get good outcomes when they're teaching really badly, to be honest.
Yeah. Talking about things that are new and shiny, and you have probably been asked this a lot when it comes to AI versus teachers. I want you to imagine that a school leader is going to come up to you and tell you that AI is going to replace direct instruction in 5 years. Here's the one you've got. Do you agree or do you laugh in their face?
I don't know if I'd laugh in their face.
Politely, professionally.
No, I really doubt it because, I think there's a place for, and I can imagine, I think there's a place for developing tech tools, AI tools, which are to do with adaptive teaching, adaptive assessment, which would have to be pretty extensive, and you'd have to have a lot more kit in most schools so that kids could sit at individual stations and have the AI responding to them. And I think there are some pathways where that could be quite successful. So, if you have packages where adaptive questioning is happening. So depending on your answers, you get new questions and new material to read. And so different learners in the room are progressing at a rate appropriate to their success rate. And the AI is driving that. I can see that being a really good feature. And you could probably get quite far with that, sort of make it into accountable reading. I can imagine in the future, accountable independent reading would be supported by AI superbly. So read this. Right now, question. Okay, did you understand it? All right, no. Okay, so go back, and it's all done by the AI. I can imagine that being superb. So, but that's not replacing the teacher altogether, because the teacher has to, select a curriculum, create a human space. If it's a social space, most schools don't have the resources, the money to have like that type of setup for every class. So you're always going to have social interaction in the room, and as soon as you have social interaction in the room being an important part of the dynamic, teachers are absolutely essential to that. Yeah. But teachers probably, and then you use the information so that AI, if it reports back to you things that it's learned, like X learners made this amount of progress and some have got stuck on this concept, or the concept which seems to be the least well understood is this, and that informs you about, okay, let's teach that again. That would be great, wouldn't it? So if you have your AI assistant or whatever. So I can see that happening. But the idea that you'd be replaced, to me, that just sort of changes the whole nature of what school is. I mean, the idea that you just go and you sit in a place where AI sits on a computer and kind of, even if it's got a funny face and a name, hi, my name's James, I'm your teacher, it's that's not only going to go so far. But it's not like it's never going to be a part of education. I mean, I think I can see it helping if you harness it in that way. And there are other things like, this is getting better, like the training, AI to assess, is it good, is it bad? So you're on a laptop in a lesson and you write in a paragraph and the AI bot says, okay, boom, feedback. I mean, that'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Imagine if you had individualized feedback being generated around the room, which you couldn't possibly get around to do in this real time. That would be awesome as well. Yeah. But that would be like you coordinating that, using that information. So I can imagine all these things. Now, I have to say imagine, because the truth is they don't exist yet. You can't do that yet with AI. You can't reliably assess writing across a class in real time yet. But it will come. Of course it will.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then people are trialing and doing all sorts of different things with imaginative prompts, and now with multimodal capacities, and obviously with the EU AI Act that's come out, and we can see it getting there. And there's always that, whenever conference you go to, when AI is talked about, there's a massive draw in there, and there's always that conversation of it's going to replace teachers. And I think what you've hit there is the social mobility and social capacity that school brings, and AI as an assistant and as a tool. And for me, I struggle let's say, with always wrapping my head around research. But I found that with AI, I find it massively more helpful to break down research, to make sense of research. And I think that's one of the things that can actually help educators with a lot, is with their CPD, with professional development, of making sense of things, of floating ideas between it. I think it has capacity to actually make teachers continually better and help them continually improve, because it can hold on to so many things that educators struggle with when we say, well, you need to be an expert in feedback and you need to understand cognitive load theory, and then I want you to understand Rosenshine's principles. Well, on top of that, you need to understand social emotional learning, and there's a lot of things they have to carry, and that capacity to dip in and learn through it, I found, is really, really influential. And I think moving forward, I'm hoping we'll see more schools pick it up, not from let's use this in schools for teaching and learning, but actually let's start with using this for professional development and supporting teachers.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, digestive stuff and just all that kind of stuff. I mean, I do think in lessons, I mean, I've seen some nice examples of it. It's not even AI, is it? It's just sort of like things like self-marking. So some students, I think it was a geography class, it's a school where they had iPads, and they start the lesson, read questions, and then submit the answers. And the teacher's has this little console, and they're saying, okay, so nearly everyone's got number 2 wrong. Let's talk about number 2. And it's so quick. I mean, and then that sort of technology through Quizlets, quick quizzing apps and stuff has been around for a while. But I think when you learn to interact with technology, the truth is that this is the real, the hard truth, is that, there are, in any school, there are so many classrooms and then so many lessons going on at once. The access to the technology, the kit and the sustaining of the kit and all of that is just nowhere near where it would need to be for that to be like a system-wide kind of thing to talk about. So, it's in most of my work, which is in state schools in the UK or in Australia or whatever, it's just one-to-one technology is just not there. So you just don't have. We can't really talk about AI replacing the teacher there, because that ain't going to happen. It's just because the computer's it's not going to be at the front, and it's not going to be in front of every child. It's just, so most of the thing I'm interested in now is just still the good old human stuff.
And talking about your work, I want to sort of move on to the Walkthroughs series, which is a huge, huge series. And I mean, I've got books in there which I refer to. I've never been into a school that doesn't have. I think that's the impact of the work you've done. It's like, even internationally here and around, never been into a school that doesn't have a copy of it in their CPD library. And luckily, there's no dust on it. The spines, looks well read and everything. But I'm curious from this sense, in terms of, obviously, when schools start using it, from your side, what do you think is the biggest mistake they make when they start using the Walkthrough series?
I think one of the things is to sort of see it as something you kind of cover off, like you go through them all. I mean, that certainly happened to begin with. I remember someone sending me an email saying, we've done book 1, now we're on to book 2. And I was thinking, wow, that's because there are 50 techniques in book 1. I mean, you can't have done it. It's sort of, and that was in a year. So it's like, wow. So what have you been doing? So in other words, they weren't really using it in the way it's intended, which is a kind of reference for discussion and implementation of the techniques. It's okay. We can read it as a background reading and for interest as a book, but mostly it's a set of techniques which you then have to work hard on to deploy over time. So it's a bit like the analogy I often use in my training. It's a bit like it's a book of plays in a sport, say in tennis. You don't say, "Oh, I've done backhand and forehand. I've moved on to smash and volley now." We've done that. You work on your backhand and your forehand forever.
Yeah.
And you never feel satisfied that you've nailed it. So it depends on who you're playing at what standard and all that. So I feel like that's what the techniques should feel like. They should feel like a curated set of ideas which you refer to repeatedly. The other mistake is to think everyone knows what they are after the first reading or the first training. So what can happen really quickly is, let's say, think, pair, share, which is in my mind because that's the research I'm doing reading at the moment because I'm going to do a talk in a couple of weeks about what does the research say about that. Is everyone think, you might read the steps, you go, okay, that's what Tom says in the Walkthroughs book. That's what we think it is. Book's closed, parked. The training happened 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. And now everyone thinks, oh, well, when we say think, pair, share, we all know what that is. But they don't. I say, so what are the steps? What are the steps again? Oh, I can't remember. It's like everyone just has their own personal record of what they think it is. And they see the hexagon that we use for our kind of icons, and it says think, pair, share on it. Oh, I'm doing think, pair, share. So that's the mistake people make, is thinking that. So when you open the book and you look at the resources, it says, okay, step one. Step one for think, pair, share is identify talk partners for every student. And that's something that's so obvious, and yet when you go into a lot of schools, which I do all the time, you see very commonly a teacher says, okay, turn to your partner, and you look around the room and you think, she hasn't got a partner. Those 3 students are in a 3. It's like, it's not that student's on their own and whatever. It's not, the teacher's not doing step 1 because they don't think they think, oh, it's just too trivial for them. Yeah. The second step is set a goal and a time frame for the question, which means it's a goal, like what are we trying to do, and a time frame. And often teachers just say something lame like, okay, guys, have a chat with your partner. What do you think about X? And it's got no structure to the question. There's no time frame to it. They don't know they have to give 3 reasons and they've got 3 minutes or whatever. It's like there's no, and they're not doing it. So you realize, okay, you think you're doing think, pair, share, but you're not following the steps, and it's not pushing you to do it really well. So that's the second most common mistake. One of them is to whiz through them, and the second one is to just glibly assume you've internalized it quickly, rather than using the steps kind of as prompts all the time to really deepen your habits.
The one you mentioned at the start there about, look, we completed it in a year, kind of makes me think that you've got things like responsive teaching, you've got retrieval practice, you've got curriculum reform, that they're trying to probably do all of this all at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from your side, do you think that trying to do everything would mean that schools actually improve nothing?
It can be a bit like that. There's a kind of tokenistic, you just can't, you haven't got the bandwidth. Like you said, there is curriculum reform and behavior management. And for some teachers, there's a learning curve on all sorts. I mean, I'm working with schools around where I live in North London where they've got some fantastic, like really just first-class curriculum resources for humanities teaching in the primary schools. Geography, history, RE. But it's a learning, they're written by really specialist expert people. But they're having to develop a command of the resources, how far, you've got a slide deck that someone else has made for you. You've got to learn where to put the emphasis, and you've got all of that. At the same time, you've got all the challenges of the children in front of you who are new to you. So you're learning how to manage really special children in terms of what their needs are and in a whole class context, all of that. And then you're trying to do paired talk or modeling. There's only so many techniques I can be really focusing on. So I feel like it's the best practice I see is where people just work on a couple of things for quite a long time until they really feel like it's become routine. And then they think, oh, maybe let's focus on something else. But of course, you're using it's a bit like playing football. If you play football as a kid and you're learning to play football, you still have a match, don't you? You kick off. You run up and down. You score. You go. All of that. You do the whole game. There are corners and throw-ins and everything. But it's like a nightmare. You watch those kids running around like there's no structure to it, and it's like, where do we begin? So you have to begin somewhere to say, okay, let's learn about positional awareness and trap and pass and dribbling or whatever. And in the practice, you have to say, like, let's practice dribbling with the ball. Let's practice one-on-one tackling or whatever. And then you go and play a match. And again, you're still doing all the other things. But the thing you're hoping they've improved is the tackling or the passing that you worked on. They're still rubbish at positional sense because you didn't come to that bit yet. But you have to just focus on a few things at a time. And that's what teaching's like. You're still doing all the things. You can't not do them. You have to do behavior management. You have to organize your curriculum resources. You have to model and stuff. But it's just that the thing you're really working on might be signal for attention and behavior management and the routine of coming into the room. That's what I'm focusing on. And I think that's an important thing to remember. It's not like you can get away with not doing the other things, but it's what your focus is for the improvement journey.
Yeah.
And of course, you might be improving the other things incidentally as well because you're just practicing them. But yeah, and that's why you have to be quite judicious in the way that you select what to focus on as a coach or a trainer and lead or a head of department. You've got to choose the thing which is going to have maximum impact for where teachers are at that time.
It made me laugh because describing football. I've went through I'm a rugby and I was a rugby coach. And obviously at a certain age, as you're trying to get them to understand how to tackle and then how to ruck and do all these different things. And you've got parents just like trying to herd cats to some extent, these little 5 and 6 year olds. It's, that sports analogy, very much rings true, resonates quite highly with me. I never thought about teaching like that, actually, in terms of where you focus and all these different things that go on in a classroom and teaching is like performing, really, isn't it? It's like playing a match. And what we're talking about here is finding the time to practice. Where do we find that time to practice so we can be better in the next match that we play?
Yeah, and sometimes you meet a teacher. God, I mean, I could be directing this to myself at certain points in my career where you think, boy, okay, where do we start? It's true. They've really got a lot of challenges. And the worst thing you can do is, and I always think this is a really important sort of philosophical point with leadership of teachers, is that teacher's really struggling. But let's assume that they can improve and will. And let's assume we gave them a job for a reason and we need to make them feel valued and so on. So sometimes even more than any other teacher, when there's so many issues to address, you've got to think, what are they doing well? You've got to big up the successes, and you've got to be very sharp in saying, just try this, because this will make a difference. Try have a go at this, and get them to feel success in improving a part of their practice. Because in the sea of challenges, they more than anyone need to feel a win, to feel an improvement quickly, and that is. And feel good about themselves, and all the rest of it, rather than going, oh my God, you are all over the shop. You need to sort yourself out. You just can't do that. So being selective in what people focus on is an important skill of a kind of leader of teachers to see what could be done. And often, this is what I find so interesting about this, is that although teachers are all quite individual and they've got a personality which we celebrate, they also have so much in common. And what I don't know if this has even been studied explicitly enough, but I'm convinced of this, that where teachers work collectively in solidarity with each other, in sort of, synced into kind of a common agenda, you just get much more progress because there's this sort of collective momentum that teachers fuel from each other. We're all doing this. We're all working on this. Mm. And schools where you go where they all sort of hype up their need for specialness, like, well, it's not a bit different from me and I'm a bit like this. And they're all doing different things. And sometimes a school has chosen, every teacher is working on a different walkthrough, for example, literally totally different. So you think, well, it's so the energy is so dissipated. You're thinking it doesn't really feel like we're moving forward very fast because everyone's talking about different stuff. Mm. So yeah, I'm a big fan of collective action, not to impose it on people against their will, but to sort of motivate people to say, come on, let's all do this together. Won't that be great? And it feels like that, a sense of shared endeavor.
Yeah. I'm curious then, do you think, and this is from what I've heard and seen from schools, why the Rosenshine principles and kind of the book has been so successful? Because go around and you speak to Dubai in teaching and the UAE in teaching is quite a small place. And you'll find that within teaching frameworks, they're kind of like, well, we follow the Rosenshine principles. So it's that collective efficacy of we're using that so that the teaching and the learning is still of high value, but it allows us all to focus on the same things together and drive teaching and learning together collectively, rather than, like you mentioned, that sometimes within PD, and I've sat through numerous PDs and went, this just isn't for me. I don't buy into this. It's got no value to me. Whereas having those types of things, do you think that's one of the, and I say one of, but I'm sure there's many, but a key reason why it's probably been so successful for such a long period of time because of that collective buy-in?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's because it resonates with people in lots of different contexts. In fact, I would, when you describe the techniques in a sort of overview way, in my book, I can combine them into sort of 4 areas. And you say, you can sort of present it to people as saying, look, everybody does this. Everyone reviews the prior learning, and you always do. Well, there's no subject you teach where you don't go back over stuff you learned before. Everyone asks questions and checks for understanding. That's universal. Every age group, every subject. Everyone models success, how to do things. Everyone provides scaffolds where children are struggling. Universal. And everyone guides practice so children are feeling successful, and then tries to say, well, now try to do it by yourself, and withdraws that guidance. And so that's universal. So you feel like Rosenshine isn't saying, hey, I've invented these wacky things that only if, that you have to sell. He's saying, when we watch teachers who are doing great work, where we watch teachers where the outcomes seem to be high, this is what we observed them doing. And because I think it works because he's not, he's reporting back to us what we do when we're doing a good job, and just described it really simply. So we recognize it about ourselves. We go, yeah, I do that. So I do need to work on that because it's something which I can recognize. And I think that's its genius is what Rosenshine is its reporting element. It feels so obvious. And that's the other critique for me. I get much more critique about it being so obvious. Why do we even need to discuss it? Rather than, that's got nothing to do with me, I don't do that. So, and I think sometimes people's assumption that it's so obvious we don't need to discuss it is common and quite weird, because you have to say, it's a bit like saying to Djokovic, forehand and backhand and serving are so obvious, he doesn't need to discuss them. Whereas, of course, the truth is, Djokovic is so good at tennis because he obsesses about the detail of his forehand, backhand, and serve every day. That's why he's good. He doesn't ignore all that stuff. He embraces it. And that's why Rosenshine is great, because it's saying, like, look, isn't it great that someone has captured the really obvious things that we all do and just says, just do these things. It's nothing, we don't have to frill it up with some great elaborate apparatus. It's just, these are the things. So let's do these as well as possible. And it will cut through to children. I mean, that's why I think it's so popular.
Just listening to you talk about that and how passionate you are for it, I'm just curious, in your journey, was there any piece of evidence, or was there a moment that kind of just sparked that real interest in evidence and actually being able to put that out into the world? Do you think, is there a moment throughout the career that you can put your finger on and go, yeah, it was that, or is there several little bits throughout the way that kind of just led you down that path?
I'd say, well, there were a couple. The first one was Dylan William and Paul Black's Inside the Black Box, which is a brilliant little pamphlet, which was published in 1998. And in 1998, I'd been teaching for 11 years. And that was the first time I had actually read anything which referenced classrooms. And everything else we read before was about policy and the politics of education and equity and stuff like that, which was always to do with science, which was my subject. But here we've got some guys, a couple of people saying, we've observed teachers teaching, and here's what we observe. They take a few questions from a few children and assume that's told them enough, and they move on, rather than checking for understanding across the class. And it's like full of provocation. And it's got this brilliant provocation there, which is that you can be out of touch with the understanding of most of the class. And it's also got a brilliant thing in there about formative assessment, about grading. So the effect of grading work rather than giving formative comments to improve it. So both of those things were groundbreaking sort of ideas, ridiculously, that, wow, why do we keep grading everything? The children don't know how to improve. If you give it a B plus, it doesn't mean anything to them. You have to not grade it and say, here's how to improve your work. And that's what will happen. So that was in 1998. I don't think I read anything as influential as that until I read Dan Winningham's Why Don't Students Like School? And which was is a brilliant. I always recommend that. And even within that book, if you read the chapter called "Why Do Students Forget Everything I Say," you get this wave of recognition and a sort of potted summary of cognitive science, cognitive load theory, which means immediately totally insensible and wow, that's why. And I need to do things like weave things into narratives. I need to get children to relay their understanding back to me. I need to do things like some drills for fluency, because then that will help. All those things, like, yeah, I totally get that. And there are a couple of others for me of very influential works. One of them is Graham Nuttall's Hidden Lies of Learners, which describes the research, which was absolutely amazing, of putting tape recorders on tables and stuff and listening to what children actually say in the classroom to each other, and the way that learning translates from a teacher's kind of sense of this is what I'm trying to teach to what the children notice and experience, and how influential they are with each other around a table, and how their prior knowledge and their family background and all these other things are a big factor in whether or not they develop the same schema for knowledge that you're trying to kind of support them with. It's just so insightful. It's like, wow, it's complicated. So you can't assume. He's also a brilliant bubble burster for any leader who's ever gone into a lesson and said, ooh, lots of lovely learning going on here. He basically says, you can't see it. Why don't kid yourself? You have to check later. You can't tell which children in the room are learning until you check later to see what they learned. And that could be quite surprising sometimes.
Do you think that's why there's the book called Making Learning Visible?
Well, John Hattie was a big visible learning and all that. I think he was big, but I feel like John Hattie's error, in my opinion, was, and I'm not the only one to say this, is overstressing the effect size element. I got a bit carried away with the numbers, and I think it was a massive distraction. So I kind of play down the influence of visible learning to me, because although the ideas in it are really interesting, the effect size thing is a kind of pollution. It's like it's distorted people's kind of intelligent evaluation of techniques, and we start saying effect size 0.72 and stuff, and it's just like, no, I don't buy all that. But anyway, yeah, I could list various sort of ideas going through that sharpen your understanding. But I'd say those sort of Dylan William probably for a long time was the most influential. Even his work on formative assessment, embedding formative assessment.
Yeah. And like, go back into what you said earlier about practices that can stand the test of time. That book's 27 years old and still stands the test of time.
Absolutely. You just think, I mean, that's what I love about, people, I love all these critiques sometimes you get. It's quite easy to bat them away. Someone will say, why are we talking about Rosenshine? I mean, some of that research that he cites is, dates back from the 70s. And you go, yeah, it's not. Surprise. Why? Because guess what? The way people learned in the 70s is the same as it is now. Because we have, the human evolution has not really accelerated significantly in that time.
No.
That should give you confidence. That's not like, oh, let's poo-poo that research because it's so old. It's like, no. Yeah. Our understanding about learning is still unchanged because, and things which come and go, we should,
And that's why people still cite Vygotsky and Piaget and all those Rosenshine from decades ago. And people have their different interpretations of them and different viewpoints on them. But the fact that their names and the work they've done is still there in the conversation, I think goes some way to support, obviously, the work they did and the influence it has had for good and bad, I think, for good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those things, the specific people that are cited, often get I think, for example, people critique Piaget for if you interpret kind of literally in some sort of specific stages of development and these those absolute truths. And I think it's good to knock some of that back. But on the other hand, some of the discourse about child development and zones of proximal development, all that, it's been almost too derided so that people don't think about that enough. And are the children ready for learning this stuff? And so I feel like there's a bit of the way that research or sort of celebrated people get associated with a kind of movement or a tradition or a camp is like massively unhelpful. But then you do have to be able to say, well, those ideas kind of aren't as strong as they had a place, but they're not a science. So when people elevate, for example, Bloom's taxonomy to like it's a science, it's like so horribly misunderstood as a concept. And it's been distorted into sort of horrible pyramids and all this kind of rubbish. So you have to sometimes you have to say, look, no, that stuff is not good. Just take those pyramids off the wall because they're just not helpful. Have you ever read what Bloom said about learning? No. Okay, maybe read it, because then if you read it, you'd be ripping those pyramids down in embarrassment like instantly. It's that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing as well, and I read something about this regarding retrieval practice, and that people and teachers learn from listening to what other teachers say. It's like, oh, Bloom's taxonomy, and you get a leader's Bloom's taxonomy, and you Google it and you see those pyramids and triangles, and it's like, okay, well, I'll use that, and it's not quite the same, but the same was kind of being said about retrieval practice. People hear, oh, we need to be doing retrieval practice. So they just start doing it without real prior knowledge or research or reviewing what it should be. They're just like, oh, well, such and such said, or leaders said this, and they gave us a brief one. It's just basically asking questions from what they've done previously.
Yeah.
Do you think
I think one of the issues, I mean, I say it's one of the biggest distortions with around retrieval practice. And one of the things that people cut out from that is the encoding. So when you learn something, you encode it. You start forming a sense of it, like a word, like a new word in French, for example. Let's say, learning the word. Trying to think of something like stylo. It means pen.
Yeah.
And it's in my head. Like, how do I encode that? To begin with, you've got to say, j'ai un stylo or something. I have a pen. Or the pen is red or whatever. You have to sort of encode the idea in your head, and it becomes an idea. I've got that word stylo, it's in my head. And then later you practice, you retrieve it. You say, what was the word for pen? How do I say this? And then you use that word, and then it becomes something you can just say straight away. I can say, every time I need to say pen in French, I say stylo. Brilliant. Because I'm practicing it. But if you just think about retrieval practice, and you just think, I'll tell you about pen, and then next week I'll get you to practice it. Well, no, because all those children over there have no idea what pen means in French. You didn't say it. They never practiced it. They never encoded the word. Yeah. It went in one ear and out the other ear in 10 seconds. Even if you'd asked them 3 minutes after you said it what the word for pen was, they'd have forgotten it. So now you've left it a week. They've got no hope. And that could be... So this kind of idea of staging retrieval, so it's built around success, practice, high success rate. Say it again, say it differently, use it multiple ways. Now try this, now try that. Right, now I can let some time pass, and now let's try again. So that staging the retrieval practice after the initial rehearsal and encoding is so badly misunderstood. I see a lot of tests of knowledge which children never had. Like, they sat in the lesson when it was being discussed, but they weren't encoding it successfully themselves. So they've never been successful, and now you're asking them to remember it. Yeah. And that type of interpretation of research and deployment needs a lot of thinking, and so I feel like that's probably one of the areas where research implementation is weak and needs to be considered quite carefully.
I'm laughing at this because in my head, I'm just picturing throughout even my career and observing lessons of kids just be like, yeah, so you've never taught us this. And just that, it's like, no, we've been through it. And then you kind of go, geez, but have you had the opportunity to encode and then re-encode? Yeah. It just makes me laugh. I can see kids, even tomorrow just be like, no, sir, we've not done this.
I love that. And that is a great phrase, isn't it? We went through it. So I love that. I mean, just have a word with yourself. I could be talking about my own teaching. We went through it last week. What does that mean? I went through it last week.
I stood there and I told you.
I said stuff out loud in the room, where you were in the room.
Yeah. Just thinking, loud noises. I just projected loud noises at you.
Exactly. Did I succeed in making you interpret that information, to make sense of it, to make meaning from it, to use it? No, I didn't succeed. So no wonder you don't know it now. And I think that's one of the rich pickings for improving learning is encoding and successful rehearsal, high success rate in early stages of learning. I think if we were all better at that and systematically involving all our students in running things through, checking their understanding, and doing it through lots of sound techniques where you can literally involve every single student doing that. It's perfectly doable. It's just it has to be done. And if you just say stuff into the room and hope they're picking it up because they're present, which is fairly common.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's just hope. It's just you're just hoping. I hope you're all learning this out there. It's like it's just not okay. It's not enough.
I'm thinking of my own teaching now, and it makes me laugh because everything you're saying, nail on the head. Right, we're going to start to wrap this up because obviously time is precious with us, and I appreciate the hour that you've given us so far. A couple of sort of say quick fire, not really quick fire, but just questions to end with. I've got the first one for you here: teaching walkthrough that should exist. If you could add one ridiculous chapter to teaching walkthroughs, what would it be?
It'd probably be something like, teaching for fun, so like it's quite serious. So it would be like, how to make teaching fun for you. Because I think if teachers don't feel it's engaging for them, their motivation drops, and that affects everybody. Yeah. So, of course, most of the time that's like the sincere, ordinary techniques. But sometimes you just want to
have fun.
It's like going off piste for teachers. There is an off piste walkthrough, but I would just beef it up with a few more kind of, make sure you yourself are enjoying what you're doing, because without you, the kids won't make as enough progress, and you need to motivate yourself as them.
I thought that was it, just literally teaching for fun, and that's why I burst out laughing. I thought it was like that. It's an end point. That's what I like to say. No, but you're right. I love that. Like, actually, we should be enjoying what we do, because if we do not enjoy it, geez, how are the kids going to enjoy learning and enjoy our subjects? Yeah. Right, let's give you the time machine test. So you meet your first year teacher self. What's the biggest mistake you would warn yourself about?
I think is to over personalize behavior management, to really work at being the adult in the room. Like, they're kids, they're saying stuff and they're doing stuff which is inappropriate, but don't affect you personally. So don't get angry, just be really methodical about the way you manage that. And I think I needed a lot of support to avoid myself literally being angry and in a way which was kind of massively unhealthy. So that's what I would say. It's like, and I think a lot of teachers really suffer from that. Like, it's just emotional. Teaching shouldn't feel negatively emotional in that way. It's just not worth it. And you have to just be able to take yourself out and go, oh God, this isn't going well, but okay, I'm doing my best. So let me just be very practical about how to address it rather than emotional about it. And that, to me, I think would have helped me a lot.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Last one for these quickfire ones, and this is the one I always get told is the hardest. But if education had a theme song, what song do you think captures the chaos and highs of teaching?
It is a hard question, and it's either going to be something like all aspirational about stars or something, but it could be Help by the Beatles, because you need a lot of help.
That's
a little help from, but I'm going to go for A Little Help from My Friends from Sgt. Pepper's.
That is a great choice. Mine was, when I think about it, I think of like Led Zeppelin, and not for any of the words, but just simply because how the songs are all over the place. And it's just slow here, fast here, screams there. And that sometimes is how it feels to me. Chaotic.
Well, exactly. I mean, I could have gone with We Don't Need Another Brick in the Wall, Pink Floyd. That's great. Negative. So I was thinking more, I get by with a little help from my friends, because I feel like teaching, although you're isolated a lot of the time, the reason I celebrate teaching as a career and really enjoyed it is because it's a very social, human profession, and you meet people. you talk about your problems. You come out of the classroom and go, oh my God, and you share, you discuss, and it's very collaborative. And the more human collaborative teaching is, the better people are at it, I think.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think the collective part, and even for me as an international teacher, the people I've met coming through and that have moved away to different countries, and you're probably the same with friends who are teachers in numerous different countries. That for me is one of the most beautiful things about it, in terms of having that international friendship you can generate and learn from as well. I think is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. A couple last things then, just sort of takeaways from this. People who are listening, people who are watching, if they were going to apply just one thing from this episode, what should it be?
Oh, I suppose to take a sort of wider theme of what we've been doing, I would say, are you an evidence-engaged teacher? So what does that mean to you? And encourage them to try to become engaged in the ideas, so to make sure that they are not just waiting to be told things from someone else, that this is what the research says, but to know it themselves. I feel like that's empowering, to know the difference between, what Alice of Bell says or Rosenshine or whatever. To me, that's empowering. What does John Sweller actually say about cognitive load theory? And to try to get into it. And so the way to do that is to, read blogs and open those books in the CPD library and get into it. And that's saying, I respect the fact that teachers are hugely busy, so you have to be quite selective about the books you do read. But that's the one thing I'd say. If you haven't read Dan Whittingham's Why Don't Students Like School, there you go. That would be my absolute top tip. Like, read it. It's so good. It's just so good. Amazing.
Great piece of advice there as well. Now, to finish off, I asked the listeners we would be speaking today just to send in a question or two. And one of them I've got here was to ask you what your definition of progress is. Not an easy one there.
for learning, knowing more than you did before. So I'd say progress is a really important thing to talk about in any given subject, and it means different things. But basically it means moving through the curriculum and accumulating knowledge in a deeper, more connected way. That's what progress means. So, and how fast that happens, you can measure. So that's how, if a student is making progress, they know more than they did before, or they can do more than they did before. That means different things in different subjects, obviously, but that's how I define it.
Amazing. Thank you very much. What's up next for you then? What's on the horizon?
Well, I just come back from a 6-month sabbatical where I did do some work in Australia, which was amazing, but I just come back to the UK a week ago. And so I'm sort of going back fully into working this week, meeting my colleagues from the Walkthroughs team. And we've got a number of really exciting projects. One of them is, I'm really excited about. I invented it while I was traveling. I'm going to test it out. It's called the Big Classroom. And it's basically a day of training where teachers come into a room like a big classroom, and we run through all these techniques with different curriculum materials, and we kind of pretend we're a classroom and say, like, this is how these techniques work, and the teachers experience them in the room. So when we've done bits of this in our training days before, and they're always the bits that teachers like the most. So what we're going to do is just make the whole day of like solid teaching techniques all day. And we've got a number of schools across the country in England who are hosting them in their schools. There are 6 to begin with. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for testing out this model of CPD called the Big Classroom. And I'm pretty excited about that. The other thing I'm doing is writing a book with my colleagues in Walkthroughs called Coaching Walkthroughs. So we've got 4 so far. We have like volume 1, 2, and 3 of the teaching walkthroughs. We've got learning walkthroughs, which we wrote last year for students. But this year we've got coaching walkthroughs coming out, and it's just specifically, there won't be like a bestseller or anything because not everyone's going to be a coach, but it's basically steps around how to do coaching really well. And we've been working on it for a couple of years now, but we've finally got around to putting it down.
Amazing. Oh, well, yeah, I saw that. I think there was something sneaked. It might have been Ollie who maybe sent something, or you put something out like this is coming out this year, and very, very exciting. Very exciting. Well, Tom, all I can say is a massive thank you. it's been a real pleasure for me to get to speak to yourself and someone who's had a profound impact on my professional development, and I think who has had a profound impact on thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of educators around the world, and what they are practicing in the classroom, and therefore the impact that has had on students as well. So from me and my audience to you, a real big thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having this opportunity to speak with you, and wish you all the best in 2025 with these big projects and the big classroom. It sounds absolutely fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed the conversation.